Hello, my algebra mathematicians. Today we are talking about a fourth way to graph. So remember, we've set up a table, we've done point-slope form, we've done slope-intercept form, and today we're talking about standard form. In your notes, go ahead and write this down. AX plus BY equals C. Notice that the A is a capital, the B is a capital, and the C are all capital letters. That is different than y equals mx plus b. Remember, this is slope-intercept form. This b is lowercase. This b is a capital letter. That makes a difference. Okay, let's get rid of that. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make sure we solve for the missing coefficient. So sometimes we need to figure out what A is actually standing for. Well, we know in an ordered pair that this is X and Y. So X, I'm going to plug in here, and Y, I'm going to plug in here. So I'm going to get A times 2 plus 3 times a negative 1 equals 5. If that's the case, I now have 2A minus 3 equals 5. If I add my 3 over, I get 2A equals 8, which means A equals 4. Okay, the next one I'm going to solve. I'm going to plug this in for X and this in for Y. Notice that this is a negative X. That's like saying that's a negative 1 out front. So a negative 1 times a negative 2 plus capital B times a negative 2 equals 10. That's going to be a positive 2 minus 2b equals 10. If I subtract my 2, I now have a negative 2b equals 8. So b in this case is going to equal a negative 4. That is just plugging in different equations. Okay, what is an x-intercept? What is a y-intercept? When we use standard form, this is the form that's most likely used when setting up story problems and setting up the real-life stuff. So the x-intercept is where your line crosses the x-axis, which means the y-intercept would be where your line crosses the y-axis. Remember, your y-axis goes up and down, your x-axis goes left and right. So how are we going to graph in standard form? Step number 1, we're going to plug in a 0 for x and solve for y. Because in an ordered pair, if I plug in 0 for x and I get a y, in order to graph this, I would go over 0, up or down some amount. Then I'm going to go back to my original equation. I'm going to plug in a 0 for y. In this case, it would be here, and solve for x. Because if that happens, I'm going to go over so many, but then I'm going to go up or down 0 on my x-axis. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. So my first equation is 2x plus 3y equals 6. I'm going to plug in 0 for x, just because it's first. So 2 times 0 plus 3y equals 6. Well, this cancels. I end up with 3y equals 6, which means y equals 2. My y-intercept, because I plugged in 0 for x, that means my y-intercept is going to be 0, 2, because it tells me that y equals 2. So now I can go over 0, up 2, and plot my point. Likewise, I can plug in 0 to my original equation, now for y. So I'm going to have 2x plus 3 times 0 equals 6, which would be 2x equals 6 and x equals 3, which means my ordered pair, since the x is the 3, the y is the 0, would be over 3 up 0. Now, with standard form, I know I've been telling you all along you need 3 points. With standard form, you only have 2. You have the place where it crosses the x-axis, and you have the place where it crosses the y-axis. Now, one thing I'm going to tell you is that there is another way to do this, but we're going to do this, continue how we've been working out this last one. Okay, so I'm going to plug in 0 for x. When I plug in 0 for x, that's going to give me my y. So if I plug in 0 for x, that's going to be 0. And then I'm going to have 3y equals 27. Well, that would be 9. So over 0 up 9. I don't think it's going to fit on this graph. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to be up here. Yikes, sorry. Okay, the next one I'm going to plug in is 0 for y. So when I plug in 0 for y, remember my y is going to be 0. And in this case, I'm solving for x. So I get a negative 9x equals 27. If I divide by a negative 9, I get a negative 3. So negative 3, 0. This would be my line here. Okay, so that's easy enough, but really all we're doing is we're doing what I call the cover-up method. You're going to use your finger, and since you can't see my finger on here, I'm going to color it in. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover up the x. When I cover up the x, I'm solving for y. I just take a negative 24 divided by a negative 6, which ends up giving me y equals a positive 4. Now, I'm going to erase this one, and I'm going to do the same thing, but this time I'm going to cover up my y. So I'm going to get 4x equals a negative 24. Well, a negative 24 divided by 4 is a negative 6, so x equals a negative 6. So on my x-axis, I go to negative 6, and on my y-axis, I go to positive 4, and I graph my line. One more. Again, I'm going to cover up my x-axis first. 3y equals 9. That's going to give me my y-intercept of 3. If I go back and I erase, this one is going to be covering up your y now. 2x equals 9. Ooh, this one doesn't work out even, but I know 9 divided by 2 is 4.5. So on my y-axis, I go to a positive 3. On my x-axis, I go to 4.5, and I draw my line. Okay, remember when we talked about one variable? When there's only one variable, remember I just have to go to that line. So my x-intercept already is telling me is going to be 5. So I'm going to go over 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But since there's only one variable, it's either a horizontal or vertical line. If I would do a horizontal line, it would go right through the origin. That's not what we want. I want to cut through here. That means my y-intercept, there actually is none. Similarly, I now have y equals a negative 5, which means my y-intercept is going to be negative 5. So on my y-axis, I go down 5 and plot my point. Again, I don't want to go up and down. I want to go left and right on this one. And I'm going to tell you that my x-intercept, where is it going to cross this axis? It's not. It's going to be none. Okay, so these are both listed in slope-intercept form. Could I solve it in slope-intercept form? Yes, you could. However, it's going to make your life a lot easier if you're trying to find the intercepts to put it into standard form, which means I have to get it as ax plus by equals c. So the x and the y need to be on the same side. I'm going to go ahead and move this over. Negative 4x plus y equals negative 6. So if I use my cover-up method and I cover up this is negative 4 over here, y equals a negative 6. If I let go of that and I now cover up my y, this one's going to be a little trickier, but I'm going to get a negative 6 over a negative 4, which is a positive 6 over a positive 4, which becomes 3 over 2, or 1.5. So on my x-axis, I go over 1.5. On my y-axis, I go down 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I draw my line. Now, just for fun, I'm going to show you I still can graph that in slope-intercept form. Remember we started at negative 6, and then I went up 4 over 1, up 4 over 1. My line's not very straight, but those blue dots should be right on my line. Let's make it a little straighter. There we go. Because I can't look at the graph by graphing it in slope-intercept form and know exactly where that intercept is, it makes it easier to put it back into standard form. So we're going to do the same thing here with number 8. This one is going to be a positive 1/2 x plus y equals 2. Now, one of the tricky things about standard form is that we don't like to ever have a fraction in there. And we know how to get rid of fractions, right? We just multiply the whole equation times 2. This becomes x plus 2y equals 4. So if I use my cover-up method, x equals 4, y equals 2, I go on my x-axis to 4, on my y-axis to 2, and draw your line. Now, in Google Classroom, we're not quite done. I thought we were finished. Making sure that this is not negative and that a, b, and c are not fractions. So this is what I was just talking about, making sure it's in standard form. So the other thing is we don't want to have a be negative. So I'm going to move my 3x over. So I'm going to get negative 3x plus 2y equals 4. Now, since the top one is negative, I don't want that. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to change all my signs. So the actual equation should be 3x minus 2y equals negative 4. Some things you see will accept that first number being negative, some won't. However, they don't like to accept the first number being a fraction, or any numbers being a fraction. So if I move this over, I get a negative 2/3 x plus y equals 8. Well, again, I'm going to multiply, and at this time I'm going to multiply everything by a negative 3. Oh, let's do that different color. Okay, so that gives me a positive 2x minus 3y equals a negative 24. Any of the other numbers can be negative, they just don't like to start with it for some reason. And finally, on the last one, I'm going to move my 1/4 over. That's going to be a positive 1/4 x plus y equals a negative 2. Multiply everything by, you got it, 4. So that becomes just x plus 4y equals negative 8. And finally, on the last one, it is already in the right form. I just need to take everything times a negative 4. That would be a positive 32x minus 3y equals a negative 1. It's easier to get rid of fractions anyway. Now, in Google Classroom, you're going to have a Quizlet. It's not going to be a Quizlet Live. It's going to be Quizlet flashcards, which will be easy to work through. You're also going to have an IXL to work through. And then finally, you're going to have your worksheet in your packet. Make sure you're doing both the Quizlet and the IXL. And I might do a Quizlet matching game. We'll see how that goes. I'll decide.